Phantom broadcast. Ethan Carter had spent years building his reputation as a podcaster who uncovered the bizarre and unexplained. His show, Dead Air Chronicles, had grown from a niche interest to a massive online sensation, drawing thousands of listeners eager to hear his deep dives into urban legends, lost transmissions, and chilling unsolved mysteries. But this time, the mystery had come to him. It started with an email from an anonymous listener. The subject line read simply, 132.7 FM, listen at 3:13 a.m. The message contained no greeting, no explanation, just those instructions. Ethan had received plenty of cryptic messages over the years, but something about this one unsettled him. Maybe it was the specificity of the time, or the odd frequency that didn't seem to match any known station. Whatever the case, he knew he had to check it out. That night, armed with his best recording equipment, he tuned in at precisely 3:13 a.m. At first, there was only static. Then, faintly, something emerged, a distorted voice, crackling through the interference. "Can you hear me?" The voice was familiar, too familiar. It was his own. The first transmission. Ethan Carter stared at his radio in stunned silence. The voice crackling through the static was unmistakably his. "Can you hear me?" The recording equipment picked it up, the waveform flickering on his laptop screen. His breath hitched as he listened. The distortion made it sound distant, warped, like an echo of himself from another place, another time. Then the voice spoke again. "Don't investigate this. Turn it off." A chill crawled up his spine. He yanked off his headphones and turned off the radio. His heart pounded in his chest. This had to be a hoax, some elaborate prank. But how? No one knew he'd be listening at exactly this time. Ethan sat in the dim glow of his desk lamp, replaying the recording. The timestamp confirmed it was live. No preloaded audio, no trick. It was him speaking, but he had never said those words. His first instinct was to reach out to his audience. He drafted a post for the Dead Air Chronicles subreddit. Weird transmission on 132.7 FM at 3:13 a.m. Sounded like, me? Anyone else ever heard this frequency? I recorded it. We'll analyze. He attached the clip and hit post. Then, unable to shake the unease, he went to bed. That night, he dreamed of voices whispering his name. The next morning, Ethan checked his subreddit. His post had blown up overnight. Hundreds of comments flooded in. User_3am. Bro, this is seriously creepy. Where's the full recording? Radio ghost. That frequency shouldn't even exist. 132.7 FM isn't registered anywhere. Spectre Seek, wait, I heard something similar last year, but my voice was in the transmission. Anonymous 333, stop investigating. Delete this post. That last comment sent a shiver down his spine. Determined, Ethan ran the recording through his software, filtering out the static. The voice became clearer, too clear. It wasn't just saying, "Can you hear me?" It whispered something else, barely audible beneath the distortion. "They're listening." Ethan's fingers hovered over his keyboard. Before he could type, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated. Then curiosity won. "Hello." Silence. Then faintly his own voice echoed back. "Turn it off." Click. The line went dead. Ethan wasn't scared easily, but this was something different. He felt watched. Determined to get answers, he set up for a live episode. He would stream his investigation, breaking down the audio, analyzing the signal, and, if possible, tuning in again. At 3 a.m., he went live. "All right, guys," he said, his voice steady despite the dread gnawing at his gut. "Tonight, we're diving into the Phantom broadcast. If you're just joining, here's the clip I recorded last night." He played the audio. Thousands of listeners tuned in, chatting frantically. Nidal92. "Dude, this is terrifying. Skeptic Steve. Probably just a pirate station messing with you." Echo Void. "What if it's a recording from the future?" Ethan took a deep breath. "Let's tune in live." He adjusted the dial to 132.7 FM. Static. Then, a voice. "Ethan, why didn't you listen?" The chat exploded. Ethan's blood ran cold. It was him again, but this time the voice sounded desperate. "They found me. They're coming for you next." A loud bang rattled his apartment. The stream cut to black. When Ethan woke, the apartment was silent. His recording equipment was fried. His laptop screen cracked, his mic dead. His phone was missing. The last thing he remembered was the bang. Had someone broken in? He checked his stream. The entire broadcast was gone. Not just deleted, erased. No record of it ever happening. Then his eyes caught something on his desk. A radio. It wasn't his. The dial was set to 132.7 FM, and the speakers whispered in his own voice, "Can you hear me?" Ethan grabbed the radio with shaking hands. The whispering voice, his voice, continued, looping like a broken record. "Can you hear me?" Then static. His phone was gone. His stream was erased. His equipment destroyed. And worst of all, he couldn't remember what had happened after that last bang. How much time had passed? He checked his wall clock. 6:13 a.m. 3 hours. Gone. A pit formed in his stomach. He needed proof, something to prove to himself this was real. Grabbing his spare microphone, he hit record and spoke. "This is Ethan Carter. Something is happening to me. If I disappear, someone needs to find out the truth." Then, against every ounce of his better judgment, he turned the radio dial back to 132.7 FM. For a moment, just static. Then something else. A soft, rhythmic sound. Breathing. Not his. And then his own voice whispering, "Ethan, don't go outside." A sharp knock at the door. Ethan jumped back, his pulse slamming against his ribs. Another knock. Slow. Deliberate. He stared at the door, breath hitching. He wasn't expecting anyone. The radio crackled again. "It's not who you think." The knocking stopped. Ethan stood frozen. Then, summoning every ounce of courage, he crept toward the door and looked through the peephole. Nothing. No one was there. His fingers hovered over the lock, but something inside him screamed, "Don't open it." Instead, he backed away and grabbed his laptop. He had to reach out. Someone needed to know what was happening. But when he opened his email, his inbox was flooded. New messages. 99 plus. Subject: Stop broadcasting. Each one was from unknown sender. No email address. No reply option. And they all contained the same message. "They hear you." Ethan felt trapped. Every rational part of him wanted to walk away. Smash the radio, delete his accounts, pretend none of this ever happened. But the other part, the investigator, the storyteller, couldn't let it go. Instead, he did the only thing he knew how to do. He pressed record. "This is Ethan Carter. If you're hearing this, something has gone wrong." He described everything. 132.7 FM. The strange messages. The knocks at his door. If he vanished, he wanted the world to know what happened. Then he took it a step further. He uploaded the recording directly to his podcast feed, titling it, "The Lost Broadcast." No intro, no edits, just raw audio. Within minutes, his phone buzzed. A new text. No number. No sender. Just 2 words. "Too late." Then his lights flickered. The radio clicked on by itself, and his own voice whispered through the static. "They're here." Ethan backed away as the whispering continued, looping endlessly. His own voice, distorted, echoing through his apartment. Then something new. A sound beneath the static. Scraping, like fingernails against wood. The closet door. His eyes locked onto it, heart hammering. He wasn't alone. The scraping grew louder. Then a click. The closet door creaked open an inch. Ethan bolted. He grabbed his keys, his backup phone, and ran out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. Out in the hallway, his breathing ragged, he called the only person he trusted, his best friend, Ryan. The call connected. "Dude, it's 3 in the morning. Ryan," Ethan gasped. "Something's in my apartment." A long pause. Then, "What apartment?" Ethan blinked. "What?" Ryan's voice was cautious. "Ethan, you don't have an apartment. You've been missing for 6 months. The line went dead, and from inside the apartment through the door, his own voice whispered, "Can you hear me?" Ethan's breath hitched. Ryan had to be messing with him. "Stop joking," he muttered, gripping his phone. "I just talked to you yesterday." Silence. Then, Ryan's voice came back, lower, hesitant. "Ethan, you disappeared 6 months ago. Your podcast stopped. Your place was cleaned out. No one's heard from you." Ethan shook his head. "That's impossible. I was just in my apartment. I recorded an episode tonight." Ryan exhaled shakily. "Ethan, where are you right now?" Ethan turned to look at his apartment door. The chipped paint, the brass number 407. But something was wrong. His name wasn't on the door. A different name was there, scrawled on a peeling sticker, M. Delacroix. His stomach twisted. "Ryan," he whispered, "I don't think this is my apartment." A heavy silence. Then Ryan spoke, voice taut. "Get out of there. Now." Ethan didn't hesitate. He sprinted down the hallway, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The building felt off. He knew these halls, these turns. But the walls looked older, worn down, like they hadn't been maintained in years. When he burst out onto the street, cold air slapped his face. The city around him was quiet, too quiet. No cars, no distant hum of life. And then he saw the posters, plastered on a nearby wall. His face, missing Ethan Carter. Last seen August 13th, 2024. 6 months ago. The world thought he was dead. Ethan stumbled through the empty streets, his mind racing. If he had been missing for 6 months, where had he been? He needed answers. Pulling out his phone, he searched for his own podcast. Dead Air Chronicles was still online. But the last episode wasn't the one he remembered posting. Instead, there was a single file uploaded 4 months ago. Final transmission. His heart pounded as he hit play. A burst of static. Then his own voice. "If you're hearing this, I'm already gone." Ethan's blood ran cold. "They took me. The ones behind the signal. They're listening now." A rustling sound. A sharp breath. Then, 132.7 FM. It's not a station. It's a doorway. The audio cut to silence. Ethan's fingers trembled. His own voice, his real voice, was telling him something. But what? And why couldn't he remember? Before he could think further, his phone buzzed. A new email. No sender. No subject. Just a single line of text. "Tune in one last time." Ethan had 2 choices. Run. Or listen. Everything inside him screamed to leave this alone, to walk away and pretend none of this had happened. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. He needed to know the truth. So, against all reason, he found a cheap motel, locked the door, and powered up his old radio. 132.7 FM. The static poured through the speakers, empty, endless. Then, slowly, something emerged. A voice. His voice. "Ethan, you're out." But not for long. A sharp chill ran down his spine. "They'll pull you back soon. They always do." His own voice from somewhere else. "You have one chance. Destroy the radio. Leave no recordings. Tell no one." Ethan's grip tightened on the dial. "Who are you?" Silence. Then, a single whisper. "You know who I am." A knock at the motel door. Ethan's blood turned to ice. The radio crackled. "They're here." The door handle twisted. Ethan lunged for the radio, yanked the cord, smashed it against the table. The static screamed. The lights flickered. His vision blurred. And then, silence. Ethan woke up to sunlight streaming through the motel window. His head throbbed. The radio was gone. His phone lay on the nightstand. A single notification blinked. New episode uploaded. Final transmission. His hands shook as he opened it. A recording. Static. Then his voice. "If you're hearing this, I'm already gone." Ethan's chest tightened. He whispered, "No," because now he remembered. The radio wasn't just a signal. It was a trap. And every time someone listened, pulled them in. Somewhere, in the dead of night, A young man sat in front of his computer. He scrolled through his podcast feed, looking for something spooky to listen to. That's when he saw it. A new episode of Dead Air Chronicles. Final transmission. Curious, he hit play. A burst of static. Then, a voice. Faint. Distorted. Can you hear me? Phantom Broadcast 2. Return signal. It started with a package. No return address. No markings. Just a small, unassuming cardboard box left outside the apartment door of Mason Lane. A tech journalist with a fascination for lost media. Inside, nestled between layers of crumpled newspaper, was an old cassette tape. A sticky note was attached to it. The writing in messy, uneven letters. Do not listen. Burn this. Mason turned the tape over in his hands. No label, no markings, just a black shell, its reels wound tight with magnetic tape. Curiosity burned in his chest. He had heard of urban legends surrounding lost broadcasts, mysterious transmissions, and cursed recordings. But this was different. This was real. Carefully, he slid the tape into his old Sony Walkman, put on his headphones, and pressed play. For a moment, only static. Then, faintly, beneath the white noise, a voice. Can you hear me? Mason's breath hitched. The voice was distorted, distant, like it was speaking through layers of time and static. Then clearer now. My name is Ethan Carter. If you're hearing this, I need your help. Mason's fingers trembled as he hit stop. Ethan Carter. That name sounded familiar. He opened his laptop and searched. The first result sent a chill down his spine. Podcaster Ethan Carter still missing, feared dead after mysterious broadcast. Mason's pulse quickened. Ethan had vanished nearly a year ago after airing an episode about a strange radio frequency, 132.7 FM. No body, no leads, just gone. And yet, here he was, speaking on a tape that had just arrived at Mason's door. Mason pressed play again. Ethan's voice came through, more urgent this time. They took me. The ones behind the signal. I'm trapped. Mason, you have to find me. Mason froze. How did Ethan know his name? The more Mason listened, the worse it got. Beneath Ethan's voice, he could hear something else. A rhythmic beeping, almost like Morse code. He ran it through a decoder. The result? A set of coordinates. Mason's stomach nodded. The location? An abandoned radio station on the outskirts of town. That night, Mason drove out to the site. The building was a crumbling husk, an old AM radio tower that had been shut down years ago. Yet, as he approached, his phone lost signal. His car radio flickered to life, despite being turned off. 132.7 FM. Static. Then, you're getting closer. Mason's blood ran cold. It was Ethan's voice, and it was live. Mason swallowed hard. The radio tower loomed before him, its skeletal frame disappearing into the night sky. Rusted barbed wire lined the perimeter, but the main door hung open, swaying gently in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of old electronics. Broken radio consoles lay scattered, their wires spilling onto the floor like veins of a dead creature. Somewhere deep in the station, a faint humming sound pulsed. Mason followed it. Through a dark hallway, down a set of creaking stairs, to a locked metal door. The humming was louder now, vibrating through his bones. He pressed his ear against the cold steel. And then, a whisper, "Help me." Mason stumbled back, heart pounding. It was Ethan. But how? He gritted his teeth and scanned the area. The control panel beside the door was old, the buttons worn down. A faded sticker labeled it, Signal Transmission Lock. Mason hesitated. Then, he did what any journalist with a death wish would do. He flipped the switch. The humming surged, shaking the walls. Old speakers crackled to life, and Mason heard something impossible. A live radio broadcast. It was Ethan Carter's voice. "This is Ethan Carter. If you're hearing this, I need you to listen carefully." Mason's blood turned to ice. The signal isn't just a frequency. It's a door, and I've been stuck on the other side for almost a year. Static. Then, something else is here with me. Mason's hands trembled. What the hell is going on? Ethan's voice grew more frantic. Mason, you don't have much time. You need to. Bang. A heavy thud against the metal door. Mason stumbled back as it shook violently, something pounding from the other side. Then, through the speakers, a second voice. Lower. Wrong. He doesn't belong here. The radio screamed with static. Mason bolted. Mason sprinted through the dark hallways, his breath ragged. The radio transmission still buzzed around him, coming from unseen speakers. They know you're here, Mason. He reached the main control room. A wall of old dials and screens flickered weakly, and then he saw it. A figure standing outside the tower, just beyond the broken fence. Tall, motionless, watching. The radio hissed, and Ethan's voice came again. More desperate now. That's not a person. Get out. Mason's hands flew to the controls. If the signal was a door, then maybe, just maybe, he could reverse it. His fingers trembled as he turned the dial back. 132.7 FM. The tower groaned, metal grinding against metal. The figure moved, not stepping, gliding toward the entrance. And then, a new sound crackled through the speakers. A heartbeat, deep, slow. Not Mason's, not Ethan's, something else. The walls shuddered as Mason frantically adjusted the frequency. 132.6, 132.5. The static warped, twisting into distorted screams. The figure was inside the building now. Mason turned one last dial. 132.4 FM. A deep boom shook the room, like the air itself had been torn apart. For a fraction of a second, Mason saw something impossible. A glimpse beyond the static. A dark void. And Ethan standing there, eyes wide, a hand reaching through. Mason lunged forward. The second their hands touched, the radio exploded in a burst of white noise. Mason gasped, his vision swimming. The control room was silent. The tower was empty, and Ethan Carter was standing right in front of him, breathing hard, alive. Mason's chest heaved. It worked. I pulled you out. Ethan stared at him, but something was wrong. His face, his eyes, too dark, too hollow. Ethan took a step closer and smiled. Are you sure it's me? The lights flickered, and the radio crackled back to life. 132.7 FM. A whisper. Can you hear me? Phantom broadcast. Mason's breath caught in his throat. Ethan stood before him, but something was off. His eyes too dark, almost hollow. His skin too smooth, like it wasn't real. And that smile. Not relief, not gratitude, something else. Mason's fingers twitched toward his phone, ready to record. Ethan? Ethan tilted his head, his voice too steady. You pulled me out. Static crackled through the speakers. The radio tower was still broadcasting. 132.7 FM. And then, a second voice. No, you didn't. Mason's stomach dropped. He turned to the radio console, his hands flying over the dials. The signal was still active, and through the static, he heard another Ethan, weaker, desperate. Mason, you pulled out the wrong one. That's not me. The thing wearing Ethan's face laughed softly. Mason stumbled back as Ethan's form flickered, like a bad signal trying to stabilize. The smile widened. You wanted him back, didn't you? The lights in the tower died. Total darkness. Mason fumbled for his phone, using the screen's glow to find his way. The static from the radio grew louder, warping into an inhuman chorus. Dozens of voices, whispering, layering over each other. Then, a hand closed around Mason's wrist. Cold, too strong. I think I like it here. Mason yanked free and ran. Mason's only hope was the transmitter room, the place where the tower's signal control was located. If he could reverse the frequency, maybe, just maybe, he could fix this. He slammed the door shut behind him, barricading it with an old desk. Outside, footsteps echoed. Not running, slow, deliberate. The radio in the corner of the room turned on by itself. Mason. The voice wasn't Ethan's anymore. It was distorted, fractured into multiple layers. Let me show you where he is. Mason's hands shook as he adjusted the transmission controls. He needed to find the original signal. 132.7 FM had opened the door, but what if there was a way to close it? His fingers hovered over the manual tuner. Then, from the radio, try 200.3 FM. Mason hesitated. That was wrong. There was no 200.3 FM. The thing outside the door scratched against the wood. I can make you listen. The radio dial moved on its own. 200.3 FM. Mason screamed as the world around him shattered. Silence. When Mason opened his eyes, he wasn't in the tower anymore. He stood in a white void. No walls, no ceiling, just nothing, except for one thing, a radio sitting on the floor, and beside it, a man, Ethan Carter, the real one, gone, hollow-eyed. He looked up slowly. You shouldn't have come here. Mason knelt beside Ethan, shaking. What the hell is this place? Ethan exhaled shakily. The dead signal. Mason frowned. What? Ethan pointed at the radio. This is where the frequency takes people. It doesn't just transmit. It pulls. Mason's throat went dry. Then, who was in the tower? Ethan's eyes darkened. Something else. Mason looked at the radio. It was changing frequencies on its own, cycling through whispers, static, and distant screams. Ethan grabbed Mason's wrist. There's only one way out. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a tuning fork, its metal gleaming in the white void. We need to break the frequency. Mason hesitated. What happens if we don't? The void shuddered, and behind Ethan, a figure emerged from the static. A tall, featureless shape, watching, waiting, and then it smiled. Perfect replica of Mason. The same thing that happened to me. The thing wearing Mason's face stepped forward. His voice was smooth, familiar, wrong. You don't have to go back. Stay. We can make you part of the signal. Mason gritted his teeth. Screw that. Ethan shoved the tuning fork into Mason's hand. Hit the radio. Now. Mason hesitated. But then the fake Mason lunged, its mouth stretching too wide. He swung the tuning fork down. The radio exploded in a burst of static. And then, Mason gasped awake. He was lying on the floor of the radio tower, alone. The door was open, the equipment was fried, and the frequency, dead air. No more 132.7 FM. No more voices. No Ethan. Mason staggered outside, the night sky spinning above him. His hands ached, but when he looked down, the tuning fork was gone. His phone buzzed. A new podcast episode had appeared on his feed. Final transmission, Dead Air Chronicles. His stomach turned. The description read, a journalist tried to break the signal, but some frequencies never truly die. Mason's blood ran cold, because the episode length wasn't normal. It was still recording, somewhere faintly through the static. A whisper. Can you hear me?